Hey there. Yeah, sorry, I'm just caught up in all this at the moment. I keep getting these letters from some wise guys over at HMRC. Apparently, I have to pay a yearly involuntary financial charge to something called a government. Supposedly, this is to help fund education, healthcare, infrastructure, and other essential services. Well, in my defense, they can go fuck themselves. I don't have time for this. I've got way more important things to be doing. Like talking about Looney Tunes games on the PS1. I don't need to introduce you lot to the Looney Tunes. They have left such an impactful mark on pop culture, entertainment, and animation. Everyone is familiar with the characters and their many shorts, the witty writing, the clever gags, the charming dialogue, the fantastic animation, the great slapstick, the horrifically uncomfortable racism. They had it all. And yeah, despite a few awkward instances, the legacy these shorts and characters have left behind as a whole is undeniably huge. I mean, come on, anyone who's anyone can recognize these guys. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Wile E. Coyote, Marvin the Martian, Tweety, Fucknose, Speech Impediment, Stereotype, they're all iconic. But then, there was the 90s, a decade where strange things happened to many properties, let alone the Looney Tunes. It also so happened to be the era of the original Sony PlayStation. Its rising dominance in the industry, bringing gaming into the mainstream more so than it had ever been, and therefore making it very desirable for others to capitalize on that, and it seemed Warner Brothers begun to put two and two together. My god, the Looney Tunes on the console that gave us Spice World the game? Yes, please! Now granted, the Looney Tunes of course had video games before this on prior consoles, we just don't talk about them because they're dog shit. Surprisingly enough though, in an era where most licensed games were considered the devil's piss, it was when their games transitioned to 3D where the Looney Tunes flourished. Publisher Infogrames, best known for publishing the Alone in the Dark series, the first few Driver games, and even co-publishing the first two Roller Coaster Tycoon games to mention a few, helmed the Looney Tunes video game licenses during the PS1 era, and by getting the right devs on board, they helped create 4 games based on the tunes for the console. These being Bugs Bunny Lost in Time, Bugs and Taz Time Busters, Looney Tunes Racing, and Sheep, Dog and Wolf. 4 games that, as far as I'm aware, have each gone down in cult classic status, kind of. And I should know, as 2 of these games I played in abundance as a young'un and have very deep nostalgic connections to, leading me to seek out the other 2 games. Oh yeah, and I guess there's also Space Jam on PS1, but why would I want to talk about that game? Why? So to hell with it, I want to share my nostalgia and express what makes these games so surprisingly good, mostly, by diving into each one. The first of these will be Bugs Bunny Lost in Time, released in summer 1999 and developed by Arguably the most well-known of the games we'll go over today, this game was, and still is to this day, one of my favourite PS1 games. Yes, I am serious, I assure you, I am not clinically insane. I refer you once again to Exhibit A as proof. When I say that this is a genuinely well-designed and well-made licensed game considering the target audience, I mean it. The game begins as Bugs Bunny is travelling to Pismo Beach only to get lost in this warehouse. He comes across this time machine laying about and activates it, mistaking it for a carrot juicer, hurtling him through time and beginning our adventure. But before we can go anywhere, we have to go nowhere. It's too early for this existential bollocks. So we arrive in nowhere and are greeted by Merlin.
Come right in. How do you do? My name is Merlin, and I'm a sorcerer.
And as well as almost certainly being on some form of register somewhere, Merlin acts as our guide for the game, explaining that we are indeed lost in time, and that the way to get home requires us to travel through time collecting enough time clocks to return to the present. Ergo, we begin our tutorial in nowhere, and a really good one at that. It's completely open-ended, with the idea being to collect golden carrots rewarded to you for completing tasks or traversing obstacles, by utilising each of the moves the game teaches you in this area. Once we have 10 golden carrots, we get our first clock to begin our adventure. So the game is a 3D platformer collectathon, having us go through each level to collect all the time clocks, golden carrots, and Acme boxes they contain. These levels have us completing platforming challenges, exploring, solving puzzles, and fighting enemies and bosses. And I'll admit, I love the way you fight enemies in this game. For most small opponents, you have to jump on their head, crushing their entire skeleton turtle an organ structure in the process and then boot them away. In terms of the game feel, Bugs plays pretty well and has a good defined weight to him, and while feeling a tad bit stiff, it's never a hindrance. Bugs can also pick up and use certain items, throw certain items, roll under obstacles and into small gaps, climb ropes, hover with his ears, sneak around, burrow underground, and commit war crimes. Later in the game, in the medieval period, we come across Merlin once again in one of his many homes. Dude's got a piss stain on his mattress. As you progress, he'll teach you these magical spells to expand your abilities, and yeah, they're lame as shit. So the idea of these is that once you've learned the spell, you stand over these particular symbols and press R1 to activate it. There's one that gives you a really high jump, one that activates a musical-based obstacle or item, one that activates these fans for a few seconds, blowing you into the air, and one that opens certain doors, but not the one to my heart. And unfortunately, they don't really do anything to add to the gameplay at all, due to how situational they are. They only really act as a way of locking off certain areas in earlier levels so that you'll have to come back to them later. But that brief aspect aside, the gameplay is still really fun. Despite being a fairly simple 3D collectathon on the face of it, the game is surprisingly varied in its playstyles while keeping it all grounded in platforming and collecting. Some levels are more linear in their structure, while some are more open-ended and are more exploration-based. A few of them are self-contained boss battles, a few are time trial races, a couple play out like minigames, and a couple are vehicle-based. And even then, each level distinguishes itself with its own unique design, platforming challenges, and puzzles, and despite the base simplicity, they get very creative with their ideas. Take one of my favourite levels, for example. Objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. This is a vehicle-based stage where it begins as a car chase through the city, but then you crash into a factory and are then on a motorbike in these tunnels. You're then chased into the countryside, where you then end up on a tandem with the ones who are chasing you, which then breaks into a unicycle, which then leads you crashing into a barn and then riding a sheep. This level is fucking genius. And this variety in the levels is further complemented by the way the game's progression is structured. It takes you through 5 different time eras: the Stone Age, the Pirate Years, the 1930s, the medieval period, and Dimension X, or space, or the future. I don't know and I don't care. With each time period being helmed by a Looney Tunes villain, such as Elmer Fudd in the Stone Age, Witch Hazel in the medieval period, or Yosemite Sam in the Pirate Years, and each era has about 4 to 5 levels each. Now, you don't progress level to level in a linear fashion. Each individual level requires a certain amount of time clocks to open. Because of this, you're constantly hopping back and forth between the 5 time periods as you collect the clocks in each level. This goes along with the gameplay variety to keep the flow and the pace of the game constantly on the move and keeping you guessing on what's going to come next. It's really well done to prevent the game from feeling stale or boring at any point. And to act as the cherry on top of all of this, the game oozes charm in how it utilizes the Looney Tunes license to its fullest. Most levels are based off particular Looney Tunes shorts, complete with their own title cards and even having shot-for-shot recreations in the level's cutscenes. Again, only furthering the unique elements of each level. And this also extends to the game's presentation, both in art style and music. It is wonderfully vibrant and colourful, with a nice sketchy look to recapture the feel of the cartoons. Except for here though, I honestly don't know what happened. Maybe my PS3 is shitting itself, but my retinas are burning. The music as well, while rather subdued and not overly loud or bombastic, feels right at home with what you'd hear in the cartoons and has a great variety and style with each of the different time eras. Even down to the details or the character designs and animations. Yes, 1 or 2 of them look like mangled potatoes, and when Merlin saves your game he does this.
Let me save your position.
Don't ask me why this is funny, it just is. But ultimately all of this dumb shit included, that's what makes Lost in Time the great game that it is. While admittedly not the most well designed or most incredibly fun game, its efforts into the gameplay and its design go above and beyond the expected standards for a game like this. And then wrapping that all around the Looney Tunes license, which it fully embraces and utilizes it to the best of its abilities, to create a solid 3D platformer and license game that does its source material justice and then some. bomb. And many obviously felt the same, as it did well enough for them to create a second game, once again published by Infogrames and developed by Behavior, but now under the name Artificial Mind and Movement, probably so it didn't sound like someone having a stroke. In November 2000, they released an indirect sequel to Lost in Time, Bugs Bunny and Taz Time Busters. And I'm already sold because I too enjoy time busting. You son of a bitch! Much like Lost in Time, a very nostalgic game from my childhood, taking on several aspects that worked with its predecessor, but also changing a lot to create a similar yet rather different feeling game altogether. We begin the game with Granny calling Daffy Duck's pest control service to deal with a mouse running loose. Oh, and by the way, Granny's like the guardian of time and space or some shit, and she has this big ass machine that controls all this. Just a little important detail there. And while Daffy tries to catch the mouse, he jumps on the time gem, the thing that controls this machine called the time regulator. Daffy and the time gem get hurtled through time, the regulator explodes, and now we're all fucked. A stray gear lands in Bugs' rabbit hole and he gets roped into helping Granny by going through time to collect the missing gears and find Daffy and the time gem. But she insists that her pet Taz come along with us, thus we embark on adventure. So we begin in a place called Granwich, where the tutorial takes place introducing us to the gameplay. So at its core, the gameplay and game feel of Time Busters is very similar to Lost in Time, with nearly all the same moveset and some gameplay aspects, and with it of course being another 3D collectathon platformer. However, this time there's one very key difference, that being we have two characters now, Small Chungus and Motion Sickness. So yeah, now we not only play as Bugs, but also Taz. Bugs still plays just like he did in Lost in Time. He can use items, he can burrow underground, climb poles, sneak about, and hover after a jump. However, this time he can't push things or pick up heavy objects. Those abilities are given to Taz, who can also do his iconic spin as well as dig rabbit holes for Bugs. So more or less, the game feel is Lost in Time all over again, but this time it feels way more smooth and fluent. The movement is way more slick and responsive, and there's even new moves like swimming, look at his little legs go, as well as more that you learn as you progress throughout the game, such as Bugs' roll, an extension to Taz's spin ability, and even some combo moves the two can use together. Now, while fairly similar in these regards, what sets Time Busters apart is the way the game is structured. The game design and the way you progress is very different from what Lost in Time does. The idea is to make it through 4 time periods to find Daffy and the time gem. The Aztec era, the Viking era, the Arabian era, and the Transylvanian era because history? Each time era is based around a central hub which you access all of its levels from. And each era has a main feature level, a vehicle-based level, a boss level, and a few minigame and challenge type levels. You have to beat the boss of a time era and collect enough of the time regulator gears to move on to the next. And you access the boss level by finding 3 boss tokens in the era. 1 from the main feature level, 1 from the vehicle level, and 1 found in the central hub. You following this all okay? The level design is more open-ended and exploration-based this time around, revolving around you collecting items like the time regulator gears, Acme boxes, and these characters from other time eras called Lost in Time characters, ha 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 fucking ha. In these more open levels, platforming is very de-emphasized, and the level design focuses more on tasks and puzzles that require switching between the two characters and using their different abilities together to solve and complete them. And this is done extremely well, since the game makes controlling 2 characters at once really seamless and intuitive. You switch between Bugs and Taz instantly by tapping R1, and when you're controlling one character, the other does not move. However, you can use the right analog stick to move the other character about, and even press it in to make them jump. And even if your characters get separated, regardless of how far apart you are, all you have to do is press L1 to teleport the other character directly to you. Hell, the game even supports playing entirely in co-op with another player, albeit having to share a single screen. Even then, the way they have implemented using 2 characters together so effectively makes it work perfectly for single player, which is great because I hate other people. The times when the game deviates from the standard exploration collectathon gameplay is during some of the minigame side levels or in the vehicle levels. There's these sports minigames in each era that, despite being 4 completely different sports, they somehow manage to make them all feel the goddamn same here. There's these lesson minigames which are just you repeating a button combination, and I'll admit they do drag a bit. And there's some singular puzzle-based minigames, or one based around newly unlocked moves. But Who gives a shit? I'm on a goddamn dragon, bitch! Ah, man, the vehicle levels in Time Busters are all really goddamn fun, almost. Either requiring you to get to the end while collecting items along the way or race against an opponent. There's this one where you're riding through the mountains on a dragon, a snowy shield race against a pair of Vikings, or chasing down this thief through the Arabian town on flying carpets. And then finally there's this one in this spooky river. Oh wait, this is trash. Yeah, the exception of these is the Transylvanian era's vehicle level, the Haunted River, which is just ew. Your movement is so damn slow and the whole level is just a pitch black void. It's surprisingly difficult to tell where the hell you're going, and there's a lot of invisible walls everywhere, and it just makes it worse. Not to mention the abundance of insta-kill bullshit littered around here as well. Oh yeah, and for some reason just in this one level, the sound design is completely buggered. Oh yeah man, this is a great backing track, so ominous, so soothing. Really creates a rich and immersive atmosphere. My ears are fucking bleeding. On the topic of sound design, however, I do need to mention one of the best things about this game. Its soundtrack. Now with Lost in Time, they really embraced the Looney Tunes tone in its music, and with the same composer returning, what would they do for this one? Well, holy shit, they just say fuck it and go all out with something entirely different with Time Busters. This game instead opts for an incredibly atmospheric and melodic soundtrack, giving such a rich ambience with its tracks. Honestly, just listen to some of these yourself. It's so unlike anything you would expect from a Looney Tunes game, though granted they do have a few tracks with a quirkier style, but it mainly sticks to this grand and completely unexpected tone, and god damn, it's just so good. Genuinely, this is a fantastic soundtrack, one of my favourites in fact. And I have noticed that this style kind of extends to the visual presentation as well. While the graphical style and character design are pretty much along the same lines of Lost in Time, it ditches the sketchy look and has a lot more detailed and smoother textures with more advanced and moodier lighting. And again, it does give the game this slight tone that isn't what you may associate with the Looney Tunes. Don't get me wrong though, it is still a Looney Tunes game in most of what it does. But hey, I think with this unique tone and using the basis of Lost in Time's gameplay to do something practically completely different, it acts as a great sequel while being able to set itself apart and stand alone as its own thing. Again, like Lost in Time, it's not perfect or up there with some of the greatest games or whatever, and it does have some lackluster and repetitive parts to it. And to be honest, my only real major complaint with it that's not even really a complaint is that I wish the game was longer. Yeah, it's no longer than Lost in Time really, and I love the gameplay of this, I just wish there was more of it. And I have to say, this team did a really fantastic job to completely defy expectations, and create what I would honestly say are two underrated gems on the PS1 that I really wish more people would acknowledge. Both games, despite not being the greatest game by any means, really stuck with me from my childhood. I've played them both so many times, I probably know more about these games than how to handle my own finances. Yeah, I know I'm a lost cause. However, it would be the last Looney Tunes game on the console from them unfortunately, as the next two were both handled by different developers, with the next one being Looney Tunes Racing. Like Time Busters, it It was released in November 2000 and published by Infogrames, though this time developed by Circus Freak Studios. Now, I probably should bring attention to how I previously addressed this game. See, yes, the title of this video is the surprisingly good Looney Tunes games on PS1, though admittedly I include this one with a big fuck off asterisk. Not to say it's a bad game, it's certainly not, but I wouldn't say it's great, but we'll put it this way, it's the one I have the least positive to say about. So, Looney Tunes Racing is a kart racer. I would have never known. This was at a time when kart racers as a genre really just exploded, given the success of Super Mario Kart, Mario Kart 64, and CTR. So many other companies tried to throw their hat into the ring, and I guess this is Infogrames' stab at it. And it made sense given the formula at the time. You take a popular game series or license, slap their characters in racing karts, and more often than not you'd have mediocrity. Now yeah, there were some diamonds in the rough, but for the most part, unless your kart racer stood out in some way or another, then it just kind of fell into this sea of dog shit or meh. And that middling ground is kind of where I find Looney Tunes Racing. If you've played any kart racer, you've played this. This is a very average and safe kart racer, albeit with some nice qualities. The controls, which are the most important thing in a kart racer to me, are perfectly fine, they work well enough. It's responsive and has a very simple basic brake turn by pressing R1 while steering. There's no real drifting or more in-depth driving mechanics, meaning there's no satisfying feedback to it or any form of strategy at all. There's not even any driving stats, every character in the game plays the exact same. You start with 6 characters but unlock more as you play the game's different modes. But ultimately, unlocking a new character doesn't mean shit when they are no different to any other character. The power-up system too is kinda underwhelming. There's only 6 power-ups here, working on a tier system. You pick up these poker chips scattered around the track with a number on them which raises the power-up to as many tiers as displayed on the chip. The first of these is a cream pie, and it's a simple basic forward projectile. The second is a bomb that you can leave behind, the third is a thundercloud that can lock onto the nearest car in front, the fourth is a homing cream pie, oh come on! The fifth is an anvil that will just drop on another cart, and the sixth is basically the same thing as the star from Mario Kart, so again, it's kinda basic. The track design as well is just so flat and, I don't know, flaccid? Ew, no. It does have these traps that can be activated by driving through these little gates, and they are unique to each track, so that's something, I guess. But here's the thing, in the main racing mode, it just does the bare basics that you'd expect from a game like this. It's not a bad game at all, it's very competently made and does the job, but the gameplay is just so flat and it doesn't do anything to stand out amongst other kart racers. Even some kart racers that aren't up there with the greats like CTR or Mario Kart have done things to give them a unique reason to play them and go back to them. Take for example something like Toy Story Racer, which has a driving style and track design that while unconventional is very unique and plays very differently. Or like LEGO Racers having the ability to build your own cars and that really unique cool power-up system. Looney Tunes Racing just does the bare minimum, hence why I can sum it up so briefly, and it's a shame because with a bit more effort it could be so much better. Given the already chaotic as hell nature of kart races, adding the Looney Tunes to that formula should make for a fucking insane and engaging game, but it just plays it way too safe. Now of course, that's not to say it has no effort to it whatsoever, because that's not true, as once again, like the other Looney Tunes games, it really does shine in its presentation. Each of the tracks is themed after a Looney Tunes short, and it's vibrant and colourful, albeit the performance is kinda all over the place depending on how much is going on screen at a time. But when it runs to its best, it runs insanely smooth, like it's almost scary. I have never seen a PAL PS1 game run this fluently, it's frightening. And then there's the music, which also borrows from the same classical musical influences that the original shorts did. The way the soundtrack is played though is really bizarre in that each track is made up of 5 or so second music loops that will change depending on whether you're going uphill, downhill, speeding up, slowing down, or whatever. It does make it sound kinda choppy, but good god, it's glorious nonetheless. Like, tell me this isn't fucking brilliant music right here.
Figaro, Figaro.
guess I should also mention the Acme Challenge mode, which is kind of what it says on the tin, a challenge mode, requiring you to complete challenges like collecting a certain amount of items in a time limit, finishing laps before time runs out, winning a race while hitting enough opponents, winning a race without hitting walls, or racing against my apparent ultimate nemesis Porky Pig. Well, I guess I hate the cunt now. But you get the idea, though it serves no real purpose beyond unlocking more characters, which, as we established, is fairly pointless. Though I would say it's the best part of the game, given that it at least gives the very basic races more of a focus with an objective in mind. But overall, Looney Tunes Racing is just a very okay game. It's extremely standard for the kind of game that it is. Though I do appreciate for how, like the previous two games, it does embrace the Looney Tunes license, just not as much in the gameplay. It's not a game that I see myself coming back to, but it still doesn't tarnish Infogrames' streak with the Looney Tunes license to any means. And it seems that some people do really enjoy this game, so I don't know. But I mean, hey, look, does it even matter? This is coming from a man who has a giant ass poster of Space Jam on his wall. Do you really think my opinion has any merit? But anyway, this brings us onto our fourth and final game, Sheep, Dog and Wolf, otherwise known as Sheep Raider in the States. Released in 2001, again published by Infogrames, and this time developed in-house with them by a team rather appropriately named Black Sheep. Oh. Now this one is kinda unique in that it's based off a very specific selection of shorts. These starring Sam Sheepdog and Ralph Wolf. Yeah, I know he looks like Wile E. Coyote, but he's apparently a completely different character. The shorts were about Ralph trying to steal sheep from Sam's flock, usually like the coyote, using gadgets and normally resulting in failure. Though it had this running joke that the two treated it like a workplace where they would clock in and clock out at the beginning and end of each day. And that's exactly where we find ourselves at the beginning of Sheepdog and Wolf, with Ralph once again failing to capture a sheep. When he gets home, he's visited by Daffy Duck, who's looking on turning his sheep stealing into a game show, the Sheepdog and Wolf Show, challenging us to steal a sheep every level until we have the entire flock, and that is exactly the game at hand here. Now, while at first glance this may seem like another 3D platformer, do not be mistaken. This is in fact a puzzle game first and foremost, with platforming elements and some slight stealth elements as well. The aim of each level is to get both yourself and one sheep inside the goal. Each level involves using some puzzle elements or platforming to reach Sam's flock, using stealth or some other method to lure a sheep away from the flock and then transporting it to the end. And honestly, it's way more involved and cleverly designed than you may think. Like, this is an exceptionally well-designed puzzle game that genuinely requires you to sit back and think about how you approach the puzzles. Most of the puzzles are based around manipulating or traversing the environment, or using Acme gadgets to help you progress, transport things, activate out of reach switches, commit manslaughter, and these stealth elements appear when entering Sam's area, where you have to be sneaky to avoid his gaze lest you get a healthy decking. There's costumes that allow you to sneak around certain areas without being seen, like a sheep, identity fraud, and oh dear. And with each level, it's constantly throwing new puzzles, new gadgets, new gameplay elements. It rarely reuses any ideas or major puzzle elements, and each level tends to focus around a specific puzzle type or gadget. There's this one level where you have to keep disarming and reusing these mines, one with these geysers and suck holes. Gross. One level with this time machine where you have to keep traveling back to the past to alter elements to affect things in the future to allow you to progress. This battlefield where you have access to a cannon and you have to move these pipes around to redirect the cannon shots. Just god damn this little game and its creative cotton socks. There's no denying that the game goes out of its way to keep itself constantly fresh, and it's also a surprisingly challenging game as well. Like, bullshit is a 3-year-old gonna figure this out. These puzzles honestly stumped me a couple times before I got my head around them. And what's great is that the game doesn't dumb itself down for the sake of a younger audience. It puts its inventive gameplay ideas first and works all the more for it. And again, it just drenches itself in that Looney Tunes charm throughout in its animations, character designs, and sound design. And despite being only based off a specific set of shorts, it still allows for plenty of cameos from other Looney Tunes characters.
I hear you're trying to steal Sham's son of a bitch.
Oh, and the presentation as well is as good as always. Graphically, it goes for a mix of the original sketchy look of the shorts that Lost in Time did with the more detailed textures and lighting that Time Busters went for. Yet it even has its own unique cel-shaded-esque look to set itself apart. The soundtrack as well has its own unique flair with this more jazzy and funky style to it. Honestly, it's just another all-round solid effort from Infogrames. Okay, almost. So don't get me wrong, the game from a design perspective is way better than you'd expect it to be. It's clever, well-paced, and well thought out. But it's kinda hard to appreciate it when the game controls like pure jank. Yet the one thing that really bugs me about Sheepdog and Wolf is that, oh, it's clunky to play. Firstly, the default jump button is square, that's fucking gross. Yes, I get that platforming is not the focus in this game, but it's kinda natural instinct, especially since the other games and most others use X to jump as well. And I know you can change the controller configuration to fix this, but then it changes other controls to some unideal layouts, and none of them are really perfect. Secondly, Ralph feels very stiff to move, and that's really annoying, especially considering how smooth Time Buster's movement was. And then there's using and equipping items. See, using gadgets and items is a very big part of the game, and switching between them is done very frequently. But it's just annoying that in order to switch an item, you have to come to a full stop and wait through the animation, and you will find yourself having to quickly equip and unequip items, and it does disrupt things and makes it more aggravating than it should be. Like this part in the 4th level where you have to lure Sam over to this button with a flute to crush him with a boulder, giving you an opportunity to take a sheep. Once he's been crushed, you only have a small window before he gets back up, so you have to run over to the sheep very quickly. You have to come to a full stop, wait for the animation, unequip the item, and then pick up the sheep. And while the gameplay may not illustrate this, the stiff control and slow animation really makes this clunky and caused me to mess this bit up several times. There are also 1 or 2 parts in the game that can be very slow and tedious, but then again, there's only a couple moments like that. These flaws are in no way bad to the point where it makes the game not fun to play. It still plays perfectly fine and is held up by the game design. It's just not ideal is all. But ultimately, the complete package is a really creative and really well designed puzzle game. Honestly, another slam dunk from Infogrames. And sadly, the last of the Looney Tunes games that the publisher would have any involvement in. And it's a huge shame, as these 4 games really defied the standard for licensed games at the time for 2 main reasons. Infogrames knew the right people to work on these IPs to create 2 great and memorable 3D collectathon platformers, an albeit safe and unoriginal yet competently made kart racer, and a surprisingly well designed and inventive puzzle platformer, but also creating games that fully embrace their source material and utilizing it to the best of their ability to act as the basis for what I can say are 4 wonderful, underrated games on the original PlayStation. Kinda. Especially with Lost in Time and Time Busters, 2 games that have remained some of my favourites on the console and are still great fun to play to this day. Well, that's that. However, since I spent all my time talking about Looney Tunes games from the 90s instead of paying my bills and taxes, I've had all my assets repossessed. And yes, I may be homeless, but at least I got to share my opinion that Looney Tunes Racing was a 5 out of 10 and I will not be told otherwise.